Ben, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Ben, I'm talking to the father of all things political blogs. So it's an honor. It's an honor. You were the
At least in New York.
you were the original, so to speak. Um,
It was really fun to write the only political blog in New York in 2000 and like 4, 2005. It was much more relaxing than when
how did
when there was
how
competition.
did you have that vision, though? What prompted that?
Okay, I was a reporter for the New York Observer at the time. Had been at the New York Sun before that, and I spent the 2004 reading all these political blogs that were covering the presidential campaign and kind of getting all my information from them. Um, but realized there wasn't anything like that in New York City, and there was a mayor's race coming up in '05, and just figured I'll do it. And thought maybe I'd get 100 readers, and that would be cool. Like that was sort of the universe of sources and insiders. And yeah, and so launched it at the Observer in late '04, I guess, and then. For a while, this blog was called The Politicker, became the kind of central bulletin board for both, for what was going on in real time in city politics.
Yeah, Ben. Ozzy's a friend,
Yeah,
and he would mention you as someone who set the path for him in his career. So I'm glad to
Yeah,
hear.
Ozzy Pabro was my intern.
There you go.
Incredible reporter, great
Where,
guy.
yeah, he viewed you as his. He talked about you quite often and how you were a mentor to him. So it's good to see you both have now moved on to bigger and better things, and how things have evolved over time. Ben, let's get into Washington.
Sure.
President Trump has leaned in hard. He's pretty much doing what he said he would do on the campaign, but there's this weird thing, and this is what I want you to sort of give me your thoughts on. There's a weird of how far can I go, right? And he takes these positions, tariffs and federal programs and cutting, but then there are points where obviously the judicial system doesn't allow him to keep going forward. But there's a point where it seems like he taps the brakes a bit. What are your thoughts, and what do you think that the thinking and the strategy is? Is it how far can I go and let me aim high and then meet somewhere in the middle? Or do you think he's just playing out of his mind and a total narcissist and is really going to follow through on all these? In some cases, I'm fully confessing that I'm a Democrat, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think he sees this in part through the lens of kind of media, and he's just trying to, as Steve Bannon said, flood the zone. And he's doing, you know, dozens of executive actions. He's got Elon running around attacking federal agencies. He's giving, you know, comedy review style press conferences where he just randomly makes jokes and speculates on things and makes huge news. Um, and the sort of sum of it is and this is all happening in parallel with these confirmation hearings, which have basically sailed through because Democrats have not managed to rally around anything because they're just they're playing defense on everything and they're totally scattered. And so, I mean, I think the strategy, and I think they'll keep doing it for as long as they can, which it may be a little while, is just to do so many things at the same time that their critics can't get a hold of anything. I think the realities of governing at some point start to make that harder. Like reality starts to intervene and set the agenda. But right now, I think he's on an incredible kind of political roll.
Ben, what do you think of the Democrats? Did you just decided on who the new DNC chair is? I don't see a coherent message as to how to push back.
No, I mean Chuck Schumer told my colleague at Semafor, Burgess Everett, that the strategy was to wait for Trump to screw up, which is sort of the traditional how you deal with a president in his first term. I mean, I think if you look at Obama's first term, if you look at Bush's second term in particular, you see presidents coming in with high hopes and lots of energy and strategies and huge plans and a big mandate, and just come crashing down very, very fast, often over something unexpected. or a backlash to some proposal that swamped everything. If you remember Bush's attempt to privatize Social Security, um, and so I mean, I think the Democrats are kind of waiting for like what can they grab onto. I think they've started to decide though. I think it's Elon. I think that like the thing you're going to hear is this very unpopular, unelected billionaire is, grabbing around your Social Security check. Um, I
That's
mean,
it.
I think that's likely to be the Democrats' kind of core message.
Ben, are you paying attention? Are you zeroed in on New York City at all these days?
Oh yeah, can't quit it.
Thoughts? I know Mayor Adams is in D.C. His lawyers were at the Department of Justice. What's your over under on the charges being thrown out?
I just don't know. I mean, I think Trump doesn't particularly want to prosecute him, but also doesn't care that much. It's not the big priority. Um, I think it's almost like if they want to just force these prosecutors in New York and overrule them, they got to do it soon. Like you would have to they're in the kind of noisy part of the cycle now, where it makes sense to be one more thing to do now. Like in a way, the longer it drags, the harder it is. Um, he certainly has Adams in a position where Adams will do whatever he wants on immigration, but the I think Adams's reelection is looking so unlikely that in some ways it makes him less likely to be pardoned. I mean, I think Trump maybe would be more likely to pardon him if it looked like it would get him an ally the next term, and it's just the polling really suggests that Eric can't win, although maybe I'm misreading it.
Yeah, I mean that's you've delineated what many have thought. Like, why? What's the why for Trump to do something for him? Someone who's traditionally not right been one to.
Well, I mean, I think if he thought Eric looked popular and that pardoning him could bring along a lot of black voters into the Trump coalition who felt that Eric was unjustly persecuted or something like that, I think that's a story he'd want to tell. And Eric, like Trump, had been, attacked by the Biden White House for political reasons, which there's zero evidence of. Um, I think that's a story he'd happily tell. Like, I don't think he cares a lot one way or the other. I mean, I think that's sort of the issue.
Andrew Cuomo, does
I
he
mean, I
run?
think, my sort of informed speculation is maybe 80% chance he runs. And, I think he will immediately dominate the race. That doesn't mean he wins, but it's going to become I think the likeliest scenario here is that he gets in and it is a campaign entirely about Andrew Cuomo. And his Democratic opponents spend all of their time trying to knock to remind voters of why they didn't like him, although he was never as unpopular with voters as he sort of was with legislators and maybe with the media. Um, and so I think that's a big challenge. I think a lot of people like bonded with him emotionally during COVID in a way that very, very few public figures ever reach into people's living rooms and connect with them that way in 2025. And so I think that's very powerful. And I think he's going to be very formidable, but you just never know. Like he's going to step back into the limelight. And right now, I think he is really well liked by New Yorkers. And, the question that you're not really going to know the answer to until he gets in is how deep is that? And is there something that can kind of knock that loose? But I think, in a Trump's election, the argument that maybe he's not the nicest guy in the world, but he's pretty tough, like some of his negatives are a little less negative in that way. Like, he's the guy maybe who can stand. He's our version of Trump or whatever. But but you never know. You never know. I think it's also not impossible that some Republican emerges or that Eric runs on the Republican line, and that because I think one thing about Cuomo that always I sort of forget is that although he reads in New York City as a kind of conservadam, as a sort of centrist Democrat who can reach right, um, partly because he feuded, because he really blocked a lot. The left really hates him, the DSA types. The people who hate him most are Republicans, and they hate him about COVID. They feel that he, closed schools and mandated vaccines and things that have become wildly unpopular on the right. And so, although it's an interesting reality that he feels to liberals like he's a conservative Democrat, but actually the people who hate him most are Republicans.
What's the 20% that you said 80? What's the 20% that would prevent him from running?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just running, he would he would have to be mayor for 4 years, right? Like, does he want to? It would, he's living a relatively private life in which a lot of the like clouds of the sexual harassment allegations in particular, I think have sort of cleared if you look at the polling. Like, I don't think that most New Yorkers feel that he is a pariah. I think he's well liked, and there's a world where he says, you know what, like I'm not. I think maybe 2 years ago he felt that he had to. He might have felt that he just absolutely had to run for office, seeking kind of personal vindication. And I think that's actually faded a little. And there's just some world where you wake up in the morning as a human being and say, this seems like too much work.
Like his
And I
father, leave the
and I have
plane,
a
leave,
kind of a more relaxing life. That
or
does
like
not seem like the Andrew Cuomo I know, but I think that's a real thing.
leave the plane on the tarmac, right? Like his father at one point, right? Everyone thought
Yeah, that's right.
he was going to jump and he didn't. Can a
Yep.
progressive win?
I mean, who knows? I think in terms of like normal American politics, we just live in very, very unpredictable times. I think in terms of absurd New York politics where the primary is in June and no one knows it's going to happen. And I think ranked choice, which I love in theory, I think exacerbates this reality in which nobody knows that there's an election until it's over. Um, it's not totally clear to me that you can build energy around a new candidate. Like, I think, you can like somebody, Brad Lander has a real argument. Zorhan Mamdani has energy on social media. Jessica Ramos, in some ways, a very effective candidate. I just think the question is, can any of these folks, like, how do you catch fire between now and June? It's a very hard question. And I think the structure of these early primaries really favors kind of known quantities in
Ben,
the machine in some sense. And Cuomo, I mean, that's why we have this ridiculous system.
Ben, can Governor Hochul right the ship?
I don't know. I just think, I mean, it's hard to, it's so hard to predict. But obviously she's in a very weak position. And I think statewide,
What, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ben. What do you attribute that to? Because there is good policy coming out of the shop. Bread and butter issues. Why doesn't that move the needle in terms of our popularity? What do you think that's about?
I think it's always a liability when you didn't run and win your own election. Like, I think she doesn't have a base inside the Democratic Party. There's not a sort of part of the party. It's a Biden problem, actually. She's sort of she's a compromise figure who doesn't have part of the party that is obsessively passionate about her. And so there's no floor really of her support. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing is that I don't know if anybody's really like eager to get out of bed to support her, and that just leaves a lot of space. She's vulnerable to her right. She's vulnerable to her left. She looked very weak on the housing stuff. I mean, she's had some really some ideas that I think a lot of Democrats and a lot of city dwellers loved around building housing in the suburbs that then she wasn't able to just deliver on the kind of just like strange handling of congestion pricing. Also, I mean, you can argue for or against the outcome, but she just wound up looking incredibly weak.
You know what I find interesting as well, Ben? The sort of proclivity. People just think it's okay to attack her within her own party.
Yeah, nobody is afraid of her.
What do you think of Richie Torres' prospects and his approach?
I mean, I think he represents something really interesting, right? Like he in some ways was like very early to break with the kind of online left that had a lot of sway. But also really annoyed and basically I think personally got under his skin on Twitter and he just broke with them hard and then won a lot of friends in what turned out to be the ascendant kind of center right. I mean, part of it's a bit of a reflection of his district, right? Like, he represents really poor working class Latino voters, and he represents very pro-Israel Jewish voters in Riverdale. And I think in a way that turned out to be like an ascendant kind of a coalition, like the Trumpy focus on bipartisan focus on working people in the burbs and in the cities, plus these fights about Gaza that obviously politically were won by the pro-Israel side in the United States. And so I don't know. I mean, I think he's also never run in a sort of a campaign that would generate this kind of heat and this kind of incoming, and that's and then we'll see, and I think it's hard to tell how he'd like that, how he'd do in that context. But I think he's a very compelling candidate.
Ben, we have to wrap this up because I know you have other things to tend to. Who do you think right now is the top Democrat in terms of it can be national, local? Who
I
has
mean,
the
that's a
most
gr
clout?
I mean, I think, on paper, obviously, Chuck Schumer is sort of the only Democrat in the federal government with real procedural power. The Senate minority has a lot of power to stop things.
Okay,
And
go ahead.
but I also think he has not managed to seem like, and it's hard for legislative leaders to do this, but to rally Democrats nationally. And I think I think Governor Pritzker of Illinois actually is probably the one who's been most out there in terms of trying to say, hey, I'm the leader of the opposition.
Is Nancy Pelosi, you think, still in the mix?
I haven't really seen her in the mix. She's sort of toward the end of her career.
Ben, let's wrap this up. Best day on the job.
For me,
Yes, yes.
I live and die by scoops. Just anytime we got a scoop, I'm happy. So it's
What's
been a
the
good
biggest?
week for
What's the
us here at
biggest one that you
Semafor.
can think of, right? In the time you've been doing this.
In my life,
Yeah, in your career. I want to hear the
oh my
best.
gosh. Um, I'll get like a New York one that I loved was or that was a story I did years ago about Rudy Giuliani and how he had when he had some messy personal life which people may vaguely remember, and they were he had he was taking his detail to Long Island to visit his girlfriend, and they were trying to conceal it by put hiding the expenses in a very obscure city agency called the Loft Board.
Mm.
And it was sort of one of these medium-sized, interesting stories about how city government works that just happened to hit at a moment when national Republicans were elevating him in a way that was really out of touch with who he had been in New York. And that story wound up being the thing that reminded people of who he was and had a big impact on the campaign. Something that was the most consequential story in the world, but it was very high impact at the time and kind of blended very gritty New York City reporting in the basement of City Hall with the national stage, which is an intersection I've always loved.
Worst day.
Worst day?
Mm-hmm.
Um, huh. I'm a very optimistic person. I think I sort of may wipe those from my memory. We've had an incredible run here at Semafor, and lots of scoops and things. But I would say this was the worst day because it was also a really good day. But we have an incredible finance reporter named Liz Hoffman, and she's the one who broke a big chunk of the news about the collapse of the crypto empire led by Sam Bankman-Fried. And that was also, I would say, it was a inconvenient, it was a slightly scary thing to learn from her because he was a major investor of ours. And so, obviously we reported very aggressively on him and didn't let that affect our reporting, but we did wind up we were deciding that we didn't want him on our cap table and bought him out. So that was I would say that was a stressful day.
Last question, Ben. Make a prediction for 2025.
Um, I guess I think that I'll make a media prediction, which is I think that we all live in this era of a million podcasts and a million newsletters and and a million streaming services and a fragmented news environment. And we're all really sick of it, and that you're going to see things reconsolidate faster than anybody expects.
Oh, well, great. Anything you want to add, Ben, or anything you want to mention? I forgot to ask you before we wrap.
No, I mean, I feel like I just love, I'll never not love New York politics and care about them. And if people, I'm part of this New York editorial board
Oh
that's been
yeah, oh
doing
yeah.
interviews with candidates. And I'd love folks to, check out the Substack.
Who's your
Everyone does.
who's your dark horse for mayor? And we'll end there.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I've been enjoying conversations with these folks, but I think, I do think that there's obviously a
Who's
path
impressed you? Better said.
for somebody to get on the Republican line who nobody expected.
Is it
I think that is a possibility in New York, would have to happen soon. But if you see a dark horse, that's where it would be.
okay? Wow. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. And
Yeah, good talking to you. Thank you for doing this.
yeah,
It's a
hopefully it
great
won't be the
service.
last time. All the best, my friend. Talk soon.
Yeah, take care.
All right. Bye
Bye.
bye.